Metroid Zero Mission was my introduction to the Metroid series, and for a long time, it was my favorite game in the series.
Then I'll take an arrow to the neck.
I love the fluidity of movement, pixel art, and the replayability, and of course, the top-notch sequence breaking in this action platforming masterpiece. But then when I got around to playing more games like Metroid Dread, which frankly had even more fluid combat and movement, and the more recent Metroid Prime, which had quite possibly the best atmosphere of any video game, let alone Metroid game. Now I'm sitting here on the couch in my 20s contemplating if I even like Metroid Zero Mission. Is it even worth it to use our precious time on this earth going back and playing older games like this? Is it? Should I just stay ignorant thinking this game was peak as hell? Then I got sad one weekend and I decided to play through the whole damn thing again several times. So with that said, is Metroid Zero Mission still good in the modern era? Should you give this faithful Game Boy Advance remake another shot like I did? Well, let's get right into it. One of the most striking features of Metroid Zero Mission is its introduction. The opening sequence is nothing short of epic, especially for a Game Boy Advance title trying to recapture the brilliance of the original NES title. Now, I'm only a mildly stale old fart, so I never grew up with the original game, which means I have zero nostalgia for it. That being said, it's the foundation for the series, and this remake just makes that experience so much more palatable in my opinion, and if you haven't played this game before, I highly recommend you start here. Much like the original as well, it doesn't mess around with getting you right into the action. After a quote and a zoom in on Samus' helmet, you get full control. And I don't know about you, but this little sequence just gives me that moment to take a deep, big breath before I start the journey. And I enjoy breathing. Now, first, Samus is pretty weak, but for once, you can't make fun of her for losing all her powers, as this is her debut adventure, and the Morph Ball, unlike some other games, is about 3 seconds away from your starting point. But already, once you get started, I have to say this game masterfully balances tension and excitement. Sure, you just landed on a desolate alien planet with scary aliens, a charismatic pterodactyl, but the beginning does so well at easing you into that experience. There is definitely some hand-holding in the beginning of the game for the news, but there's much less of that later in the game when it decides to just trust you a little bit more. Or the Chozo just got really lazy. And once again, I will be gushing about a GBA game's visuals. I love them here, and despite the handheld's limitations, this game just doesn't care, and it's truly a timeless and vibrant and really breathes more life into the original game's designs. Just look at this tiny little pterodactyl ship before and after. Also, I did play through this game entirely on emulation, which definitely offers a new perspective on this game, with a more modern screen and a modern controller. It's available on the NSO expansion pass if you've paid the big mighty N their dues, but you can also use your friendly neighborhood Google for other options. However, I will always cherish playing this game on the Wii U like nature intended, or of course on the original Game Boy Advance where this game's visuals truly shine. But let's get into the gameplay, because there isn't really too much to discuss about the story yet. And personally, now having played every other game, I think this game has the second best combat and traversal and overall flow of any mainline Metroid game. But I do think that comes down a little bit to preference. After playing this game and eventually moving on to games like Super, my first time there, I found the game to be a little bit more punishing with things like platforming. In Super Metroid, sometimes it felt a little bit like Samus was allergic to some of those platforms, which made it a little bit more difficult, and I'm not exactly sure why that is, but at least in the beginning here, I rarely missed a platform and had to do that climb of shame after falling down a vertical shaft. And by the time some of the platforming does get a little bit more difficult, you really start racking up new abilities, like the ledge grab. This is a returning feature from Metroid Fusion, but I think it really opens up so many more options and even helps out with platforming and adds a new layer of smoothness to the movement. And this game just has some juicy movement overall, especially when you're playing this on an actual handheld Game Boy Advance OG mode, where I know at least I am a little bit more susceptible to making mistakes as opposed to playing this game with a full controller. That being said, besides for the power grip, there isn't really that much that hasn't been seen before in other games. You still have bombs for infinite bomb jumps that can be very helpful for sequence breaking. High jump and space jump also make a return just to get yourself that little bit of extra height to reach new areas. And then later in the game, you get the speed booster and screw attack to just obliterate previous platforming challenges that had you banging your head against the ground. There's also several unknown items littered around Zebes that are new to this remake and add quite a bit of intrigue.
Who's that?
Unknown pixelated trash heap I looted from a statue of my dead bird friends. There's also the hidden and worst kept secret in Metroid, wall jumping, that really provides that extra layer of complexity as well as rewarding skilled players to speedrun through this game. That's not me, by the way. I freaking suck at this game. I try my best, but I'm still struggling to beat this game under 2 hours. So I really did try to do that this time around, at least on my second playthrough, but I can't help myself sucking or just getting distracted knowing, hey, I know that missile pack is just a couple rooms down. I should just go grab it really quick instead of just powering through the main path. That being said, hopefully someday I'll let you know when I am a mildly competent runner of this game. Other than that though, this game's movement is quite unchanged from most of the experience, and this game is the typical run, gun, and hide, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But now let's get into the level design, since this is a Metroidvania, I guess, if you didn't catch on to that already. But honestly, is it? I mean, I don't see very much Vania in this thing. And should we just call these Metroid games? I don't know, another question for another day. Anyways, this Castlevania game has some of the best level design ever, and it's frankly beautiful, simple, and rewarding. Okay, moving on to the combat. I am by no means a game designer, but there's one thing I personally enjoy about this game, and that is how accessible it is. I know some of you out there might prefer the more difficult and glitch-heavy games like Super, but here it's just a little bit more comforting. I prefer this tightly packed, secrets in every room, easy sequence breaks, littered throughout the entire game. The world map isn't that huge compared to something like Hollow Knight, and I know people are gonna hate me for this, and yes, I agree, Hollow Knight is an absolutely amazing game and one of the best Metroidvanias, blah 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 ever, but there's definitely space in that game that just feels a little empty and boring after you've gone through them once before, and I don't get that here. I think that's because this is a smaller weekend type game that you can beat pretty quickly. But that's pretty true of most 2D Metroid games, and it's probably one of the reasons I like them so much. The more you know about this map, the more it rewards you, and because this game's so short, it never really gets too repetitive. Also, once you reach a new area, you get a glimpse of something else happening on planet Zebes, and these are artfully designed pixel art masterpieces, and I just think they're the bee's knees. But it isn't all space goop and Metroids out there, and there's one bummer I found throughout this recent playthrough, and that's the mixed bag of alien freakazoids that you fight along the way. I'm not sure if it's because they're trying to stay faithful to the original NES game, but I think the variety here is just a tad bit disappointing. And the only thing that really changes about them is giving them a little bit more health later in the game or making them a little bit more jumpy and annoying. There's also going to be some slight boss spoilers ahead just in case you're a newbie here, but the intro bosses are decent. But by the time you get to old Fat Boy Kraid, it starts to feel a little basic, especially if you played any other Metroid game. But I think my biggest disappointment had to be Ridley. I do remember struggling with the screeching menace the first time I played this game, but this time I just unloaded all my missiles and supers into his ass, and well, that was kinda it. It was really disappointing, and I wasn't even going for 100% here, so it's not like I had a ton of super missiles and I was overpowered. And the only boss that really gave me a challenge was probably Mother Brain, and mostly because right before you fight this, you are onslaught by these bubble brain suckers. Geez, what were they called again? Hollow Knights? Whatever. But they have absolutely infested everywhere and are trying to take away as much health from you as possible right before fighting Mother Brain, which as usual, shit's flying everywhere, it's hard to dodge, and until you try a couple times. Especially with the tiny platforms you're supposed to stay on, overall it's a good challenge. However, after like attempt 3, I realized you could stand on the little gunner head, which I forgot you could do, but that almost single-handedly trivialized much of the fight, since most of the time you're just scared about getting in the lava and that depleting most of your health. And while it's a completely different game, I'm coming off of Prime 2 where the bosses are just ridiculously insane, and it's kind of pales in comparison to that one. I also got a glitch with Imago the first time, and that just sucks, and it's something I've never seen before. And honestly, Imago's shell was probably harder than the buzzy form of it itself, especially if you suck at wall jumping like I do. There's also that classic escape sequence several times in this game, and I always love those, so
10 points to Gryffindor.
Now, once you have beat Mother Brain and escaped, this is where all the new content for Zero Mission comes in, as the rest of the game has basically just been a simple remaster of the NES game. Because at this point, Samus is an inadequate pilot and gets gunned down and has her crash land in Egypt, Chozodio. I am a real sucker for the Egyptian-inspired vibes. It really elevates the area, and this is also where Samus decides to just bare it all to you. Now I have a little bit of mixed feelings on this area. Yes, it is beautiful and adds a different vibe, but this stealth is kinda I've been kind of flip-flopping on this quite a bit, if I like the stealth here or not, if it's just hot trash, and I've settled on lukewarm trash. But while not everyone might enjoy this aspect, I do think it offers a fresh take on the traditional Metroid formula as well as expanding on what Fusion did. But it is still far, far away from the best stealth game experience I've ever played, and I found it almost more reliable to just run and gun through this entire section, which, yes, more or less this game just lets you do, which is pretty cool. But I don't know, I won't exactly say I'm begging every Metroid game to have a whole stealth region. I do prefer the little smaller areas in Dread with the Emmys, but that's my opinion. Additionally, the game's focus on storytelling and lore through cutscenes and environmental storytelling provides a much richer background on Samus's character and the Chozo's history. This narrative depth is a notable enhancement over the original Metroid, at least in my opinion. I can see some people not liking changes that were made. That being said, it's not like you're stuck here for an hour, maybe like 20 to 30 minutes, depending on how good you are. Probably closer to the 30 plus for me. But after that, you get your full suit of armor with max upgrades, and you get to go terrorize the pirates at full strength. And this is an absolute power trip, and I love this section of the game so much. But before finishing off the game, you do have the option to go explore the rest of Zebes with all your upgrades on hand, which I did a little bit for the sake of it, but I had absolutely no plans on doing a 100% run right now, and I wanted to get this video out. The final battles, including the climactic showdown with Ridley, which again was a mild challenge, but not the series best, and that's really it. It's time to just hightail it out here at the end of the game. God damn it. I can't believe after playing this game several times, I always fall for that bitch. But anyways, time to enjoy your stats and hopefully get one of the good ending screens. And side note, I really like this one where she's just sitting at a bar hanging out. And now I kind of thought Samus would be the type to go to the bar with a full suit of armor on, but whatever, I gotta let your girl unwind and unpack all that childhood trauma and alien fighting PTSD. But that's it, that's the game, and overall I think this game really stands the test of time as a stellar example of how classic games can be reimagined and enhanced. It's an epic introduction, smooth gameplay mechanics, and has meticulous level design that really stands out for this title, and I think can really captivate new and old players. Whether revisiting this game on a Wii U or through the nostalgic lens of the Game Boy Advance, this game's charm and quality is just undeniable. Zero Mission is not just an unknown pixelated relic of the past, but a timeless masterpiece, and it is still absolutely peak gaming in 2024, and I hope you enjoy your next romp through this game, and thanks for watching this video as always.